Folks said no one with sense rode into Sundown Basin after dark, unless they were looking to bury a secret, or become one. The town squatted low between jagged buttes like a wounded animal, mean and half-forgotten, a place too stubborn to die and too dangerous to thrive. No mapmaker claimed it, no lawman rode through, and the mail wagon passed it by as though afraid to even glance its way. Dry gulches cut deep into the earth around it, swallowing careless riders whole, and the wind carried the kind of cries you couldn't blame on coyotes. Sundown Basin was where men went to vanish, and where women learned not to ask whose blood stained the floorboards. Clara Hensley staggered through the dust, the last color of daylight burned out of the sky, leaving a smear of purple bruises along the horizon. Her boots, split at the seams, left ragged tracks behind her. A broken cart, with one wheel dragging at an angle, clattered over hardpan behind her, carrying nothing but threadbare blankets and a few rusted tin cups. Two children clung to her skirt, Eli and Mira, both barely 4, faces pale with hunger and streaked with dust, their eyes too big for such small faces. Her hair hung in snarled waves down her back, darkened with sweat and grit, and though her frame was narrow, she moved with the stubborn, lurching pace of someone too tired to cry and too desperate to stop. The town barely noticed her at first. A pair of gamblers leaning against the hitching rail outside the Red Spade Saloon watched without comment, only trading glances when they spotted the children. An old woman sweeping the front of a Shutter Dry Goods store muttered under her breath and turned away. Nobody in Sundown Basin offered a hand to strangers unless they meant to charge for it. A mule brayed somewhere to her left. Clara turned toward the sound and saw a cluster of stock pens on the edge of town, fence posts leaning at odd angles like crooked teeth. A man moved among the animals, a dark shape against the firelit haze of the evening. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, his hat pulled low, his movements unhurried. He looked up when the mule brayed again, and his gaze found her. Clara froze, one hand on the cart's handle, her heart hammering. For a moment neither of them moved. Jonas Varn wasn't the kind of man folks called friendly. Most spoke his name in half-whispers, if at all. He traded in mules and mean-tempered horses, and was said to have a way with beasts no one else could handle. They called him the Mule Man. Some said he spoke to animals better than to people, and others claimed he'd once led a company of raiders through a ghost town and left no one breathing. No one knew for certain, because no one ever asked twice. But his eyes, when they settled on Clara, weren't cruel. They were hard, sure, the kind of pale gray that reminded a body of stormlit water, but not cruel. He stepped closer, pulling a worn kerchief from around his neck and wiping his hands absently. "Evenin'," he said, voice rough as the gravel underfoot. Clara tried to speak and found her throat too dry. She cleared it. I'm looking for a place just for the night." The twins clung to her skirts, Myra's tiny hand wrapped around a fistful of fabric. Eli's thumb lodged stubbornly in his mouth. Jonas glanced at the cart, the children, and the way Clara's hands trembled from exhaustion. "There ain't no inns," he said quietly, and she flinched before he added, "But my wagon's dry. You can sleep there." It was the first kindness she'd heard in weeks. "I've got nothing to pay," she managed, bracing for the ask that always came next. Didn't ask for pay. A low growl of thunder rolled along the horizon. Jonas jerked his head toward the stock pens. "Come on, before the storm gets teeth." Clara hesitated, then nodded, dragging the cart behind her. The wheels shuddered over loose stones, the twins stumbling to keep up. Jonas led them to a battered supply wagon tucked between two sheds, its canvas patched in places, the scent of dry hay and old leather heavy in the air. "Water barrels there. Fire'll be up in a minute," he said, sitting to work stacking dry wood. Clara lifted the twins into the wagon bed, Mira whimpering once before curling into her brother's side. She unwrapped a threadbare blanket from the cart and tucked it around them both, smoothing hair from pale cheeks. Jonas worked in silence, striking a flint to kindling until the flames licked to life. Light flickered against his face, carving deep lines into weathered skin. He kept his eyes on the distant ridge, where the land sloped upward into knife-edged hills. "Night riders out there," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Storm's pushing him. Clara didn't ask what kind. In a place like this, it didn't matter. She settled against the wagon wheel, exhaustion pulling at her bones. The fire's heat spread slow and thin. Jonas unrolled a blanket, settling across from her, his gaze still fixed on the darkness. "Name's Jonas," he said after a long stretch of quiet. "Clara." The storm crept closer, a restless wind kicking dust along the empty street. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed and a woman's laughter rang sharp as broken glass. Jonas' hand dropped to the worn handle of the knife at his belt. "My fiancé's due back from Carson soon," he said, words low, almost as if to remind himself. "Lorna May. Rides fast. Shoots faster. Her temper's quicker than both." Clara swallowed hard, a leaden knot in her stomach. She'd seen the way women like that handled threats, or what they saw as threats. "I'll be gone by dawn," she said. "Storm won't break by then," Jonas replied. Clara didn't argue. She closed her eyes, the fire's glow flickering against her lids, the twins' soft breathing the only sound near her. Jonas sat watch, his silhouette sharp against the firelight, eyes scanning the ridge where shadows moved like restless ghosts. The wind carried a scent of rain and blood. The night held its breath. Morning in Sundown Basin arrived like a fist to the ribs, sharp, dry, and indifferent. The sun crawled over the butte's jagged crown, spilling thin light into narrow alleys and over splintered rooftops. Dust clung to the town like an old grudge, and the stale scent of gunpowder lingered from some half-forgotten scuffle in the night. Clara stepped down from Jonas' wagon before first light, careful not to wake the twins. Her bones ached, and the thin sleep she'd stolen left more weight in her chest than it relieved. She brushed dust from her skirt and straightened her shoulders. Wary of eyes, she could already feel crawling across her back. Old Burkett, the grave digger, sat hunched on a bench outside the undertaker's, with a plug of tobacco bulging his cheek. He stared at her over the rim of his mug, his leathery face creased into permanent suspicion. "Don't see your kind last long here," he muttered to no one. Across the street, Greta Finch leaned against the Red Spade's doorway, her bodice sagging and a fraying shawl at her elbows. The saloon matron's sharp eyes missed little, and what she saw now put a thin smile on her painted lips. "New blood's trouble marked me," she said to a passing drayman. "Pretty soon somebody's wife will get wind, and the storm will break." The words followed Clara like grit in her shoes. She kept her chin high and went to find water. Jonas was already at the pens, breaking ice from the trough with the butt of his knife. His broad frame was easy to pick out in the dim morning light, shoulders rolled forward, the hat shading his face. Without a word, he handed her a dented tin cup, the water clean and cold. She drank it down in one steady pull, her throat raw. "Hungrier than I thought," Jonas said, not unkindly. "I'll work for my keep," Clara replied. Jonas only grunted and turned back to his mules. By mid-morning, Ezekiel Zeke Crowther appeared, a tall, whip-thin black man with a face carved by years in the saddle and eyes like river stones, sharp and steady. He'd once scouted for the army back before the war, and after that, for men whose business wasn't printed on ledgers. Folks in Sundown Basin knew Zeke could spot a lie quicker than a vulture could scent death. He watched Clara from the fence line as she lifted buckets, hauling water to the animals without complaint, though her hands shook and the bones of her wrists jutted like pale sticks. "Not many come here by choice," Zeke remarked, sidling up to Jonas. "She's running," Jonas said low. Zeke spat into the dust. "Aren't we all?" Clara met Zeke's gaze head-on when he introduced himself, and though her eyes were weary, they held no flinch. "You don't lie with your face," Zeke told her, not quite smiling. "That's rare. I got nothing left to lie about," she replied. The hour stretched, the town's half-dead heartbeat steady in its suspicion. Clara heard the whispers as she moved between chores. Words like stranger and harlot carried easier on the wind than mercy. It was while fetching grain that she overheard two drunks in the alley behind the livery, speaking of a place called Witch's Needle, a jagged stone spire north of town, where old bones lay half-buried and the ground bled rust after rain. "They say it's cursed," One slurred. "Ain't no bird sings there. And them women they took, they never come back." The other spat. "Ain't no one left alive who saw it happen but the devil himself." The words crawled under Clara's skin. She knew that name, though no one spoke it outright. The Crimson Massacre, they called it in other parts. A night when wagons burned and women vanished, and justice stayed sleeping. Clara didn't need to be told twice. Sundown Basin was its cradle. She turned away before they noticed her listening. By noon, Jonas let the twins ride Gristle, his most stubborn mule. The creature was sway-backed and ill-tempered, but the children's giggles softened the edge of the morning. Jonas watched them with a distance in his gaze, as if measuring what it might cost to let himself care. "You don't owe us," Clara said quietly, approaching him as Gristle snorted and tossed its head. "Didn't say I did. I've seen men help because it looked good, or because they wanted something." "I ain't a good man," Jonas replied. "Ask anyone." "I don't need a good man," she said. "I need a decent one." For a moment, something flickered across Jonas' face, and then it was gone, swallowed by habit. As dusk neared, a dust storm crawled down the gorge, the wind thick with grit, and the town hunkered in. Doors latched, windows shuttered. The storm was bad enough, but it wasn't what made folk nervous. It was the sound of hooves, fast and furious, pounding up from the south trail. She rode in like the storm itself, a tall, flame-haired woman in a black riding coat, her hair unbound, her colt gleaming at her hip. The pearl handle caught the last light as she dismounted, and every head turned. Lorna May. Even the wind seemed to hush as she strode down the main street, dust swirling at her heels. Jonas stood by the pens, and Clara saw him stiffen. His jaw clenched. "Where is she?" Lorna barked, voice sharp as a crack whip. Greta Finch was already waiting by the saloon doors, and old Burkett squinted from his bench, knowing a reckoning when he saw one. Clara stepped from the wagon's shadow, the twins still laughing atop Gristle. Their eyes met across the yard, Clara's worn, steady gaze and Lorna's fire-lit fury. "You got some nerve," Lorna hissed, hand brushing her colt's grip. "I came for no man," Clara said. "Only shelter." "Shelter's mine," Lorna snapped. "Always was." The tension clung like wet canvas. Jonas took a single step forward. "She's under my protection," he said, voice low. The words might as well have been a shot fired. Lorna's lip curled. "We'll see how long that lasts." And the storm howled down out of the gorge. The storm rolled over Sundown Basin like a beast with 100 howling mouths, choking the streets with dust and flinging grit against shuttered windows. Horses stamped nervously in their pens, and the air smelled of coming rain and old blood. But it wasn't the storm that had drawn every soul into the main street that evening. It was the woman riding at its front, red hair loose and eyes burning like embers. Lorna May dismounted with the grace of a knife drawn from a sheath. She ignored the gathered townsfolk as though they were cattle, stalking straight toward Jonas Varn, the storm at her back. "You got some gall, Jonas," she spat, her voice carrying over the wind. "Taking in a gut or so like that, letting her bed down in your wagon while you're promised away." The insult cracked like a whip, and a low ripple of unease spread through the townsfolk. Greta Finch stiffened where she stood in the saloon doorway. Old Burkett scratched his stubbled jaw, not meeting anyone's eyes. A man could smell the trouble thickening. Jonas didn't flinch. He stood with his feet planted, his face stone-hard. "She's got 2 young uns. Needed a place out of the storm." "Is that what we call it now?" Lorna sneered, her gaze darting toward Clara, where she stood by the wagon, one arm around each of her twins. "Charity for gutter trash? Or are you looking to trade up Jonas? Trade out the woman who built your name in this place." "She's not here for me." "Then why is she still breathing?" Lorna's voice cut sharper than the wind. "This town's got rules, Jonas, and stray bitches with no name don't belong inside our fences. I want her gone. Tonight. And those brats sent to the orphan house, where they belong." A sharp intake of breath from the crowd. Even the dust seemed to hang in the air. Zeke Crowther pushed forward from the edge of the circle, his tall frame looming as he squared his shoulders beside Jonas. His face was set like hammered iron. I won't stand for that, Lorna, he said, voice quiet but carrying. Not in my sight. You've no say here, Crowther. Lorna shot back. I reckon I've got more than most, seeing, as I'm one of the few not afraid to call a devil by her name. Clara stepped forward then, one hand still holding Eli and Mira close. The wind pulled at her hair, dust streaking her face, but her voice came out steady. I'll leave when I'm dead, she said, fixing her gaze on Lorna. Jonas saved my life, my children's lives, and I'll see myself buried before you lay a finger on them. You ungrateful sow, Lorna hissed, her hand twitching toward the pearl-handled Colt at her hip. You think you know something about this place? About me? Clara's chin lifted. I do. The street fell silent. Even the storm seemed to hush for a heartbeat. I know what you are, Lorna May, Clara said, her voice rough with old wounds. I've known since I saw your face in that firelight all those years ago. You and your riders, you were the ones who slaughtered those wagons up at the Needle. The Crimson Massacre, they called it. I was there. I saw you. I saw that hair, that gun, and the way you laughed while women begged. The air thickened. Faces paled. Greta Finch gasped, one hand to her chest. Old Burkett dropped his mug. Jonas's face went slack, a terrible understanding dawning in his eyes. You, he murmured, looking from Lorna to Clara. I was a girl, Clara said, her voice soft now, but no less sharp. Left for dead among the ashes. Those twins, she glanced down at Eli and Mira, their wide eyes fixed on her. They were babies in that wagon train. I carried them out of the smoke. Lorna's hand tightened on her gun. You're lying. Am I? Clara's gaze was steady as stone. Tell them how you took the jewelry from their mothers' necks, how you burned the wagons so no lawman would find proof. Tell them how you wore a red scarf and sang Lorena while they died. Lorna's face twisted. You don't get to speak my name, whore. Jonas stepped between them then, his massive frame blocking Lorna's line of sight. That true, Lorna? He asked, his voice low, ragged. Were you there? A flicker of something, fear, rage, maybe both, flashed in Lorna's eyes. You were too, Jonas, she spat. Don't pretend clean hands now. You rode with us to Witch's Needle. Or did you forget? The crowd recoiled as though struck. Jonas' face went white. I left, he rasped. I saw what it was. I left. No one leaves clean, Lorna snarled. Not from that night. A long, terrible pause. I knew I should have getted you back then, Lorna said, fixing Clara with a look so venomous it seemed to sear the air. Could have saved myself a heap of trouble. Her hand snapped to her Colt. Before the barrel cleared leather, a shot rang out. The bullet struck the ground inches from Lorna's boot, sending dust spitting up. Drop it, Zeke called, his rifle steady against his shoulder. His gaze was unflinching. Right here, right now. Lorna's jaw clenched, her finger twitching against the trigger. You fire that iron, Lorna, and I swear by every grave in this basin, you'll not leave this street alive, Zeke promised. Around them, men reached for their guns, but no one moved. Lorna hesitated, just a heartbeat too long. Zeke gestured with his rifle. Let's have the truth laid bare. All of it. You owe this town that much. The wind howled through the empty street. Clara never broke her stare. Jonas said nothing, his face carved from guilt and stormlight. And Sundown Basin, for the first time in years, waited to hear its own dark sins named. The hour after the standoff felt brittle, stretched thin like the skin of a drum before it split. No one spoke. No one dared move too quickly. Sundown Basin was a town long used to swallowing its secrets. But tonight, it was clear those secrets had grown teeth. It was old Burkett who finally broke the silence. His voice was rough, like boots scraping over gravel. Reckon there's one way to settle this. Greta Finch spat into the dust. Same way we did in the old days. A night ride, murmured someone at the back of the crowd. Out to Witch's Needle. The name hung in the air like smoke. Men shifted uneasily, glancing toward the northern ridge, where the jagged stone spire loomed, its crooked silhouette clawing against the starlit sky. Jonas Varn's jaw flexed as he stepped forward. We ride, he said, his voice hard as hammered steel. All of us. Clara too. If she's lying, it ends tonight. If she's not. His eyes found Lorna's. We end this. Lorna's lips curled in a cold smile. So be it. And so they rode. A line of riders snaked out of town beneath the moon's pale eye. Jonas leading on his big roan, Clara astride a borrowed gelding with the twins bundled against Zeke's saddle behind her. Lorna rode at the front as well, her hair a streak of fire in the gloom, the pearl-handled Colt gleaming at her hip. Behind them came the town, grim-faced men, wary women, folks too frightened to stay behind but too drawn to blood and reckoning to turn away. Even old Burkett and Greta rode out, their faces set and unreadable. The land beyond Sundown Basin was a jagged, indifferent stretch of dry gullies and wind-sculpted stone. The trail twisted, the wind carrying faint sounds of coyotes and the restless shuffle of hooves. No one spoke. When the needle came into view, that narrow, jagged stone thrusting from the earth like a dead man's finger, even the bravest men's spines prickled. The ground around it still bore scorch marks in places, half-buried wagon wheels, and the dark shapes of burned timbers poking through the sand. The ghosts of old since clung to the place. Jonas reined in. Here. Clara dismounted stiffly, her legs unsteady, but her voice clear. She gestured toward a sagging, blackened tree stump near the stone spire. It was here, she said, pointing. We made camp where the land dips by the rocks. The wagons circled up tight. My mother was fixing coffee by the fire, and the babies were asleep in the canvas cradle. The townsfolk gathered, their faces shadowed and strained. You remember all that? A voice asked skeptically. Clara's eyes were sharp. I remember the horses first. Black gelding with a snake brand on its flank. A dapple gray with a double X. I remember the men that rode in, faces masked, save one. Her gaze pinned Lorna like a nail through bone. A woman, red hair loose, singing Lorena like it was a church hymn while the fires took hold. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She carried a Colt just like that one. Clara went on, pointing to the pearl-handled revolver at Lorna's hip. Only she didn't draw it till my mother begged. The night shuddered. Lorna's face was pale now, the defiance trembling at its edges. And this, Clara said, untying the faded scarf at her neck and turning her shoulder to the light. There, a puckered scar traced across her skin, an old, cruel burn, pulled from a fire pit when one of her boys dragged me off, saying they didn't leave witnesses. A boy who dropped me and ran. Jonas's breath caught, color draining from his face. God above. Clara's gaze swung to him, unreadable. It was you, wasn't it? Jonas swallowed hard. I didn't know you lived. I thought. I was 16, God help me. They made me ride with them. First killing I ever saw. I couldn't, I ran. I ran before it was done. The confession landed heavy in the circle of gathered folk. Whispers rippled, faces turned, old suspicions settling into hard truth. I carried you out of a creek days later. Jonas went on, voice raw. Didn't know you then. Just a half-dead girl staggering into a mining camp. I put food in your hand, pointed you toward water. Thought I was doing penance. His voice cracked. Been trying to live clean ever since. Clara's face held no softness, but she gave a short nod. Then you'll see this finished. I will, Jonas swore. The spell broke when Lorna wheeled her horse around, fury and fear twisting her face. You fools, she spat. You all knew what I was. You took my money, drank my whiskey, followed my lead when it suited you. Now you grow a conscience. She yanked her Colt free. A single gunshot cracked the night, but it wasn't hers. Zeke's bullet struck the ground by her mount's hooves, sending the animal rearing. Drop it, Lorna. Some of the men in the back drew as well, a few faces torn between loyalty and fear. Lorna didn't hesitate. She fired wildly, grazing Jonas's shoulder and sending the crowd diving for cover. Gunfire erupted, echoing off the stone walls. Clara hit the dirt, grabbing the twins behind the rocks. Jonas returned fire, his shot catching one of Lorna's loyalists in the thigh. Zeke moved like a ghost through the dust, picking off another who raised a weapon. Lorna dismounted, crouching behind a boulder, blood staining her sleeve. She fired again, a shot meant for Clara. But Clara wasn't a girl anymore. She rose from behind cover, hand steady as she lifted the very Colt that had once marked her mother's death. It had fallen in the scuffle, and now the pearl handle gleamed in her grip. "No more," Clara said. The shot was clean. Lorna jerked, a crimson bloom spreading across her chest. She slumped to the earth beside the needle, her breath rattling once, twice, then stilled. The gun smoke thinned. The wind carried the last echoes away. No one cheered. No one spoke. Jonas staggered, clutching his arm, and looked at Clara through eyes hollowed by old sin. "You've a right," he rasped. But Clara holstered the Colt and turned away. "I ain't here for your soul, Jonas. Only mine." The town gathered themselves, shaken and ashamed. It was old Burkett who muttered it first. "Basin needs a lawman." And Greta, wiping tears she hadn't noticed falling, added, "One who don't flinch from ghosts." Eyes turned to Jonas. He shook his head, but Zeke clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You owe it." Jonas looked to Clara, who gave the barest nod. And so it was done. At dawn, they buried Lorna at the needle's base. No marker, no words. The town turned back toward Sundown Basin, leaving one ghost less to haunt them. Dawn came hard and cold over Sundown Basin, the sky streaked with pale orange, and the land washed clean of blood, but not of memory. The wind had softened, carrying the dust down into the gullies, and a brittle hush hung in the air. Folk spoke low, if at all, their eyes avoiding the trail leading north. Jonas Varn stood alone at the base of Witch's Needle, hat in hand, the soil beneath his boots dark and loose where they dug the grave. He'd refused offers of help, shoulders squared against the wind as he lowered Lorna May's body into the earth. There was no prayer, no words. He filled the grave himself, the scrape of the shovel against stone harsh in the morning quiet. The others had ridden back hours ago, leaving only the hush of the high desert and the needle's long shadow to witness it. When the last stone settled, Jonas stepped back. He left no marker, no cross, just bare earth, a grave to be swallowed by wind and time, and with it, a chapter of the basin's oldest sins. Clara took shelter in an old trader's shack at the edge of town, half rotted, its porch sagging, but solid enough to keep out the wind and close enough to water. She made no claim, asked no permission. No one challenged her. The townsfolk, cowed and chastened by the night's reckonings, began appearing one by one over the next days. A sack of cornmeal left by the door, a bucket of clean water. Greta Finch sent a mended blanket under cover of dusk. Even old Burkett muttered something about extra nails, leaving them on the porch rail. None of them spoke of what they'd allowed to fester. None of them apologized. But there was a shift, small as it was, in the way they looked at Clara. Not pity, not suspicion, something older, harder. Recognition. Zeke Crowther took up a badge, not the polished kind, but a flat, hammered bit of tin bent into shape. Deputy now, by Jonas's request and town assent. He made it clear from the first that Sundown Basin's old sins wouldn't crawl back up from their graves. Not while he drew breath. He moved through town with a steady presence, his rifle slung easy, a hard glint in his eye for those who tested the new order. The town's drifters and bullies learned quick to keep their peace. The twins, Eli and Mira, flourished. Free to fear, they laughed for the first time, chasing Gristle around the scrubland, the old mule snorting and bucking with mock impatience. Clara let them run, the sound of their shrieks lifting the weight in her chest a fraction. Jonas came by sometimes, offering no words of comfort, no apologies. He'd lean against the fence post, watching the twins tumble in the dirt. Gristle took a surprising liking to him, and Mira, stubborn as a cactus bloom, often clung to his sleeve. There was no talk of forgiveness, no room for it, but there was something quieter, a shared, grim acknowledgement between two people who knew what it meant to survive the wrong things and keep walking. One evening, as the sun bled down behind the buttes, Jonas left a small, well-worn wooden box on Clara's porch. Inside were a pair of silver coins, a sewing needle, and a single yellowed letter from a long-dead mining camp. No note attached. She understood. They spoke little, but when they did, it was plain talk. about weather, about stock, about which trail gullies would drown a man come rain season. They never spoke of Witch's Needle. The town changed in small, stubborn ways. A rough fence mended. A boy caught stealing given work instead of a beating. The saloon fight still came, but the knife stayed sheathed more often than not. Men like Zeke Crowther kept a long memory, and the worst of the old lot took their leave of Sundown Basin under cover of night. And through it all, the basin itself seemed to settle. The storms came less fierce. The coyotes sang a little softer. And folks claimed, in the way folks do, that the curse had broken, but not entirely, because if you rode out past Witch's Needle under a high, dry wind, you might still catch a glimpse of a lone grave, half swallowed by stone and thorn. Some swore you'd hear a woman's voice weeping on the wind, a sound like distant singing, or a fire long since doused, but never quite cold. They said it was Lorna May, mourning the fire she'd started, the blood she spilled, and the chance for peace she'd bartered away for power. And as for Jonas Varn and Clara Hensley, they carried the basin's truest scars. He became its lawman, though he never wore the badge easy. Folks respected him because he bore his ghosts openly, and let no man's crime go buried. Clara raised those twins under open sky, shoulder marked by old flame, eyes sharpened by things most would never name. She took in strays, mended fences, and when storms rolled down the gorge, she faced them standing. They weren't friends, weren't lovers. They were something harder, forged in dust and fire, a bond not for sharing or naming, only surviving. And so the story went. They say Sundown Basin's curse broke that night. But if you ride out past Witch's Needle, you'll still see a lone grave, and hear a woman's voice carried on the wind, weeping for a fire she started and could never quench. And if by some long, ill-fated chance you meet a hollow-eyed horse trader and a woman with a scarred shoulder, tip your hat and move along, because you're looking at the last two souls who remember the Crimson Massacre and lived to burn the ghosts from this earth.